Join the coven. The Tenant, a story written by Pierce Bradley. A link to their website will be available in the description down below. When I was 13, my parents went away for a few weeks one summer. They had finally saved up enough for the trip to Europe my mother always wanted to take, and they didn't want me along for the ride. So before they left, they shipped me off to my dad's childhood home to stay with my grandparents for the rest of the summer. My grandparents owned a ranch along the stretch of the Unitas that reached into Utah, and it was the same ranch that my father had worked when he was my age under the direction of my grandpa. It was also the same ranch that I found myself on the doorstep of one warm summer evening. The ranch house had a hallmark look and feel of a mountain cabin, and anyone who's been to one knows what I mean. This was fitting, considering that the expansive property extended into the Utah mountains themselves, with the ranch house resting picturesquely on the foothills. My grandparents used to use the property to raise some cattle, but nowadays they were retired and the cattle were gone. All that was left of the animals were a couple of old horses that they couldn't bring themselves to sell. As I stood on the porch of the ranch house, I could hear those old horses whinnying to each other in the fields. I buzzed the doorbell again. My parents were late to their flight, so they had just dropped me off. But they said my grandparents were expecting me. I knew it took old people longer to get to the door, but my grandparents were in good shape from their days of working on the ranch, and it had been longer than one would expect normally. Suddenly, I heard a muffled thud from behind the door, then hushed voices muttering back and forth. The sound of the chain being unhooked from the door came so suddenly out of the hushed noises from within that I nearly jumped back. I heard the sound of a lock slide away, and then another, and finally the door swung open. There was my grandfather, standing in the doorway, and although his face beamed with a friendly smile, he seemed unprepared or perhaps on edge. My grandmother approached from behind him, and together they both welcomed me in and told me I could take up in my dad's old room. I climbed the stairs to the loft that hung above the entryway and found my way through the open door off to one side that led to my father's old room. The area was new to me, of course. I had met my grandparents before. They had come to visit a few times before throughout my childhood. But this was my first time visiting them, and I had never seen the places my father grew up. Of course, it had been thoroughly cleaned out, and all of the boyhood items had been removed, but there was an old bed in one corner and a desk in another. I threw my bags down and started to head back downstairs for dinner. That was when I noticed it. The door. It stood directly next to mine, between my room and the bathroom, and whatever room lied beyond shared a thin wall with mine. The door handle was much older than all the others in the house, which had all recently been replaced. Beneath the handle sat a large old-style keyhole. I met my grandparents for dinner, and they gave me a rundown of the whole place and the things I could do to keep myself busy. They'd need help with some chores, of course, but I had nothing better to be doing, so I didn't mind. Along with that, I could shoot BB guns, throw knives, explore the property. The sky was the limit as long as I did my chores and was back before dark. I was too excited with my new freedoms to remember to ask about the old door. After dinner, I found an old Super Nintendo Entertainment System and a TV on the loft, and I spent the rest of the evening setting it up and playing Castlevania. There was even a stack of old tapes I could watch if I ever got bored. I remember feeling very pleased with my situation. There was plenty to do outside, and when the dark came, or the weather was bad, there was the Nintendo and the tapes to keep me company. I didn't pay that door another thought. My first night in my new lodgings was a harrowing experience. The old house groaned, and I swore that at least once I heard the stairs creak and the floor of the room next door squeak. I knew old houses were loud, but I wasn't prepared for it. I slept little that night, but steadily grew more and more accustomed to the noisy old house with each night that I slept in that bed. My first few summer days passed lazily. I would work with my grandfather on various duties around the property until it was too hot to keep working, and then I'd be free to explore the forest on the property and entertain myself until dinner. After dinner, I'd play video games and watch tapes, and then I'd go to bed and do it all again the next morning. Once a week, my grandparents would go into town for groceries and be gone until dusk, so I would have one day without chores where I was home alone. One day, shortly before dusk, I was walking through the woods near the fence that kept the horses in the pasture when I noticed a stench wafting nauseously on the ripe summer breeze. I quickly found the source of the smell. The corpse of a cougar was draped over one of the fence posts. It was badly mutilated. Its eyes hung from its sockets, and its abdomen had been ripped open. Its viscera swung lazily in the soft wind, painting blood all over the fence, almost touching the ground. I stumbled backwards in morbid horror, and after a moment of shock, I jumped over the fence and ran for the house. I burst in through the back door and found my grandpa reading a book in his recliner. I breathlessly explained to him what I had seen. He exchanged a nervous look with my grandma, who sat next to him on a chair of her own. After a moment, he cleared his throat, saying it was probably the outcome of a turf war between two cougars. Part of me wanted desperately to believe him, and another part told me there was something he wasn't telling me, but I buried that part of me. I had just watched a tape of The Thing last night, and I knew it must have been making me paranoid. He told me to stay inside while he went to take care of it, and I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. Over the next few days, I found more mutilated carcasses hung over the fence or in tree branches. I found raccoons, geese, and even coyotes, and sometimes I even found more than one at a time. Each time it happened, my grandfather would tell me to stay inside while he went to take care of it. And then we'd all continue on like nothing happened. No matter how many times it happened, I never got used to it. Things grew stranger as my time there turned from days to weeks. My grandparents had gone into town, and they said they wanted to catch a movie and would be back later than usual. They wanted me to stay in after dark, and that was fine with me. I was looking forward to watching Suspiria, home alone in the darkness. And that's exactly what I did. It was 11 when the movie ended, and I was just turning the TV off when I heard the stairs creak. My hair stood on end. My grandparents shouldn't be home for another hour. I heard no car coming up the gravel driveway, no sound of the garage door swinging open. I saw a shadow against the wall climbing up the stairs. It was tall and lanky, but the shadow was unclear and its shape was hard to define. I felt my blood run cold. The thing slowly ascended the stairs, making no noise save for the creaking of the steps. As quickly as I could, I squeezed myself between the couch and the wall, hardly daring to even breathe. I sat there silently, listening. I heard the stairs squeak, and I suddenly recognized the sound. That squeaking was the same sound I had heard every night during my stay here since the very beginning. Whatever it was reached the top of the stairs, and it drifted past my hiding place behind the couch. As it did, I felt a dreadful wave of cold pass over me. It was like a wave of misery and hopelessness, unlike anything I had ever experienced before or since. And, oh God, the thing's breaths, how slow, wet, and terrible they were, like a knife scraping against stone. I had to try very hard to stop myself from shaking out of pure fear, and I at once became aware of the tears streaming from my eyes. I heard the sound of a heavy key scrape against the lock of that old door, and it creaked open. I recognized that sound too. I heard it tens of times before, each night as I tried to sleep. I heard the sound again as the door clicked gently closed. The wave of cold misery drifted away as it did, and after what seemed like an eternity, I at last heard the sound of an engine in the driveway. I didn't come out of my hiding place until I heard my grandparents' voices in the hallway. I rushed down to them and tearfully told them what had happened. For a split second I saw the looks of sheer horror on their faces, but they were gone in an instant. My grandfather told me it was their old tenant. He said that he was a bit of a shut-in, and that they didn't tell me about him so that I didn't try and bother him. Though still deeply unsettled, I at first tried to believe him. I was gullible like that. However, as he sent me up to bed, my mind took me back to the feeling that had swept over me. I am confident now that only one thing can make a human being feel so distraught: pure evil. As I neared the top of the stairs, I thought I heard my grandfather whispering to my grandmother. "Good God, it's loose," was what I thought I heard. Sent a chill down my spine. Using all the willpower I could muster, I walked past the old door and into my room. I closed and locked the door, and went to hide under the covers. Tears began to run from my eyes again as I shook violently, still reeling from the encounter I had had. Sleep never came that night. I heard squeaking and scraping coming from that room all night long, and I couldn't stop remembering the sounds of those dreadful breaths and the feeling of all-consuming evil I wanted to desperately believe my grandpa. It was just a reclusive tenant after all. This thought began to fuel morbid curiosity. Perhaps if I could just look at the tenant, I could be able to relax. Another part of me screamed to stay under the covers, to hide until morning, to trust no one. But my feet hit the floor all the same, and I quietly opened my door. The moon was full and bright, and the loft was well illuminated. I crouched in front of the door next to mine. The old wood stank, and the black paint flaked. I put my eye up to the keyhole. I could make out a dark circle, but as my eye adjusted, I could make out the full shape. An eye, massive, stretched wide open like a gaping wound. The whites tinted a sickly yellow, gazed back at me. I heard the terrible sound of those breaths once more. My God, I will never get that eye out of my head. It will forever be in there somewhere watching me from inside myself. I fell backwards, shaking violently, too terrified to even scream. I crawled back to my room, unable to stand and close the door. I lied there, shaking, on the floor for the rest of the night. The next morning, I found blood smeared all over the door handle on the old door, and 3 more carcasses draped over the fence. These 3 were completely skinned. In the end, I suffered a nervous breakdown. The doctors claim it was due to sleep loss from insomnia. I suppose that's partially true. I was unable to sleep for weeks. Sometimes at night, I could hear the tenant stop for a moment on his way back from his midnight trips and just wait outside my door for hours, only finally going back into his room just before sunup. There were other times that he would start tapping on the thin wall between our rooms, loud, grating taps, like someone was tapping my teeth with a spoon. The tapping was in a pattern, maybe some kind of code, but I'm too afraid to try and decipher it now. My best guess is that he knew that I had seen him and was reaching out for a friend, maybe a victim. I had no interest in being either. What really triggered my first meltdown was what happened next. One morning, I opened my door to find the dismembered head of my grandfather's prized horse staring up at me. I gave a blood-curdling scream and began crying and gibbering. I was taken to a hospital, and my parents' trip was cut short. They never found the rest of the horse, but the ripe reek wafting out from underneath the old door spoke for itself. I think the tenant wanted to share with his new housemate. My grandparents died a year after that incident. The police told us it looked like a cougar had done it. I knew better. The tenant was upset that I never returned, and he punished the ones that took me away. I asked the police about the old door. They said the room was empty. I'm 23 now. It's been 10 years, and I'm still taking medication for anxiety. So why write this all now? Well, last Saturday at 11 p.m., there was a knock on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw a dark shape. I fell back, terrified. 10 years of counseling told me that these things I had seen weren't real. I checked the peephole again. An eye, wide, massive, yellow, gazed back at me. A quiet, scraping voice whispered through the keyhole. May I find a place to stay here? I don't remember the rest of the night. I think I locked myself in the bathroom until I heard the sound of banging on my door. It was the police. They had found the bloody t-shirt of a missing child stuffed in my mailbox. They still haven't found the child, but the ripe reek wafting from my attic speaks for itself. Angels Aren't Beautiful, a story written by Richard Saxon. A link to their Reddit profile will be available in the description down below. My father was a harsh and broken man, nothing more than an empty shell of his former self after serving one too many tours in a war no one ever understood why we fought. It didn't help when my mother, who'd already checked out mentally, fell pregnant with an unwanted child. Rather than reveling in the joy of creating life, my father dug himself deeper into the bitter hole of hatred he had spent so many years digging. Not only had I unwillingly intruded his existence, but I was born with a pretty obvious birth defect. My face never fully developed in the womb, presumably due to the drugs my mother consumed to cope with the stress of abuse. Whatever the case, it left me with only one functioning eye and half a paralyzed face. It's not an excuse for what he did, it's only an explanation. He used to tell me that the day I was born was the worst day of his life, that I was nothing more than a burden, an accident, not meant for this world. Needless to say, I hated myself. I felt ugly, and my father did everything in his power to make sure I understood just how much of a freak I was. He never put a hand on me, nor my mother. I'll give him that, I suppose. But abuse comes in so many forms, and despite not having the guts to kill me himself, I knew he wanted nothing more for me to do than to just disappear, and even as a young child, I wish I had never been brought into this world. That would all change the night I met my very own angel. On one particularly long night, I was kept awake by another shouting match between my drunken father and my drugged-out mother. We had fallen into extraordinary debt, with both my dysfunctional parents unable to hold down a job. I lied, hidden beneath my blanket, clutching my one and only friend, my stuffed animal, a swan that had suffered one too many tears, broken and ugly, just like myself, but that's just what made me love it so deeply. Something shifted in the corner of my room, changing the entire atmosphere, air turning heavy, and the sounds of the heated argument were suddenly drowned out to muffled cries in the distance. I peeked out from under the blanket, thinking my father had come up to shout at me, but the legs that greeted me did not belong to anyone or anything I had ever seen before. They were beaten and cracked, dark liquid seeping from the tears in the skin. As I moved my eyes up to see the rest of its naked body, it became apparent that this creature was severely wounded, charred skin covering the entirety of its being. It appeared to be a man, at least shaped like one, 10 feet tall with dark wings extending from its back, half stripped of their feathers alongside the flesh, leaving nothing but exposed bones and tendons. If monsters could ever be described by their appearance, this thing would perfectly fit. I should have screamed, run for the door, or jumped out the window, anything to escape that horrid sight. But something about the broken creature calmed my young self, soothed the fear that built up in my body. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice sounding tinier than it ever had. The creature looked at me in confusion. "You do not fear me?" he asked. "No. Why? Are you bad?" He smiled, revealing a row of rotten teeth. "No, I am not bad, but my form typically invokes a sense of fear in your kind." "Is it because you're ugly like me?" For a moment, he just looked at me, inspecting my malformed eye and paralyzed face. Then he laughed. "You may look different than your fellow humans, but your heart is as pure as the day you were born. I can see the good in you." The creature spoke in words my young self couldn't fully comprehend. But from the little knowledge I had, I could understand what he was. I never really knew my grandparents. In fact, my grandpa was the only one still alive by the time I came into this world. And I only met him one time, sick and riddled with tumors. He told me a story about the purest creatures in existence, the ones that would look after lost souls, such as himself, during the final moments in his life. And for a reason I cannot fathom, I connected his comforting words with the thing that was standing before me in my room. "Are you an angel?" I asked. He thought for a moment before responding. "I am a type of angel." "Then what's your name?" "My name? Our kind has no use for names." "Everyone has a name, but if you don't have one, I will choose one for you." I thought long and hard before finally settling on the most suitable name I could come up with for the angel. "I will call you Gary," I said excitedly. "Then that will be my earthly name." I glanced over his body once more, wondering if he had been born damaged like myself, or if someone had hurt him. "How come you look like that?" "Putting myself in a physical form comes at a cost, and it takes a toll on my existence. You see, I was not granted permission to come here." By then, my parents had stopped arguing. I must have been louder than I thought, because shortly after, I heard someone pacing through the hallway towards my room. Being loud after bedtime was a strict no-no, a rule that only applied to myself. My father slammed the door open and barged into my room, holding onto the neck of a half-empty bottle, slurring his words. "I have had it with this He stopped dead in his tracks, gasping briefly before suddenly choking. Something invisible stopped him from moving an inch, and I saw the angel staring intently at my father with a gleaming smile across his face. "What the hell are you?" my father managed to push out between gasps of air. "I am here to protect this child. You have inflicted enough damage, and now you will receive my judgment." My father started twitching, joints bending in unnatural directions, cracking beneath the unseen force. He gargled, coughing up blood as his body contorted into an undefinable mess of flesh and viscera. Before I could even process what was happening, he expanded, boils and blisters appearing on his skin, moments before he exploded. covering the wall behind with whatever remained of his existence. I let out a quiet yelp. It was as much as my terrified little body would allow. "I'm sorry you had to witness this. Had there been another way..." The creature was interrupted by my sulking. "He meant you harm, and with time he would have caused your death. Not today, nor tomorrow, but I had to stop him before he caused irreparable damage." With a wave of his hand, the remains of my father turned to dust and disappeared, leaving no trace that a murder had just happened. "I have to go. I will return when the time is right, but I'm afraid that this is just the beginning of things to come. I am so sorry." I don't remember much else from that night, apart from my mother hysterically screaming as she realized her husband was gone. The police asking questions as he was reported missing. Of course, they never found him, and with the assumption that he had simply taken off, the investigation quickly turned cold. It was a bittersweet turn to a better life. Things rapidly improved in the next couple of years, following my father's death. My mother did her best to get clean from drugs, even got a job, and for the first time in my life, I felt like someone loved me. The trauma I had experienced did not linger over us. It was as if something was protecting my memory, preventing me from reliving that terrible moment. My mother and I moved away to a different city, attempting to create a fresh start. Getting enough money for such an endeavor proved difficult, but somehow we managed, at least so it seemed, for a short while. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to last. Despite her best efforts, it's not an easy feat to be a single mother trying to battle addiction while hopelessly drowning in debt. One slip-up was all it took, which just happened to occur during my first day at a new school. I could already tell something was wrong when she picked me up from school, and in hindsight, I should have understood enough to alert a teacher, but suffering from trust issues and being incapable of thinking even moments ahead, I let her get behind the wheel of a car. Not 5 minutes after we started driving, she missed a stop sign and we were hit in the side by a bus. It's true what they say, time really slows down as adrenaline surges through your body. The sight of glass shattering through the car and metal bending inwards is something that has been stuck in my mind for many years. But no matter how hard I try, a moment of pure terror is all I remember before blacking out. When I came back to it, I found myself lying on the side of the road, somehow unscathed from the ordeal. I could see our car smashed to pieces further down the road, but something had taken me out before I even hit the ground. "I'm sorry," a familiar voice said. I turned around to see my angel standing above me, even more decayed than the first time we had met. His flesh had fallen from his chest, revealing ribs and organs, still pulsating heavily with each breath. "Where's my mommy?" I asked. "I could only save one of you," his words carrying the burden of guilt and sadness. He bent down to my level, reaching out his rotten hand. "I believe this belongs to you." It was the swan plushie. He brushed off some pieces of glass and gave it to me. "She's dead, isn't she?" I asked. He nodded. "Why couldn't you save her?" "I was not supposed to." "Why not?" One day, you will have all the answers, but until then, you have to be patient. It is not time for you yet. I don't understand. Before I could ask more questions, the angel had disappeared, leaving me alone with no one but the mangled corpse of my mother still stuck inside the car. Years passed, and I spent most of my childhood moving from one foster home to another. Trauma and abuse takes its toll on a young child, and as it was, I simply couldn't fit in with a new family, and I found no one willing to take care of someone so broken. Every now and then, I would remember the angel's words from our first meeting, that the bad things were just beginning, but though my childhood was lonely, it was relatively safe. I wouldn't see my angel again until I started high school. If you ever thought bullying stops at a certain point during education, that people somehow mature as they get older, you'd be sorely mistaken. Due to my deformed appearance, I couldn't seem to escape the nasty looks nor gangs of bullies. A particularly bad crew of people were led by a girl named Jennifer, putting chairs in front of bathroom doors as I entered to spare others the sight of my disgusting face. One day, just following physical education, I wasn't fast enough to shower and exit the locker room, and as a result, I found myself trapped by Jennifer's vicious gang of misfits. They had stolen my clothes, pointing out that if I had just spent the rest of the day naked, maybe it would distract people from my disfigured head. They laughed together as they shoved me around, cold, wet, and naked. I could do nothing but hold back my tears. Out of nowhere, my angel appeared. He placed himself directly behind the squad of girls and looked at me. His wings had mostly fallen off by that point, leaving only a few bone fragments protruding from his back, and his face had become an unrecognizable mess of torn flesh. He simply nodded before vanishing into thin air, as he always did. No sooner had the angel left before Jennifer started screaming her lungs out. She had glanced in the mirror and had seen the angel, but that wasn't what caused her to get so upset. "What have you done to me, you crazy witch?" she yelled at me. I didn't understand what she was so freaked out about. If not the sight of the angel, then what could be so bothersome? But I didn't care to stick around, and after getting dressed in record time, I spurted out of the room. No one bullied me after that day. However, the rumors had reached every corner of the school, and people genuinely thought I was a witch. Jennifer never returned, and no one could tell me what happened to her. Whatever it was, she didn't deserve it. Despite the things she did to me, no one deserves the wrath of an angel. I spent the next few weeks searching out the angel, waking up at night yelling for his attention, but he had never responded. In a bizarre and cruel turn of fate, the bullying had become the only attention anyone ever gave me, and without even that, I felt more isolated than ever. Sleep eluded me, and for each night spent crying, I came closer and closer to finally taking the step and ending my miserable existence. I guess the angel didn't see that coming, because for some reason he appeared to me once again, only this time I was my own danger. "You finally come to see me again? Why do you even bother? Aren't there anyone more important you can protect? Someone who actually matters?" "You have a good heart. That is why I chose you," he said calmly. "Chose me for what?" I responded, more annoyed than sad. He didn't respond to my question. I was once human too, a long time ago, and I was chosen to protect people. And even now, I do not know why they chose me. So you were picked to protect people like me? No, my job was to protect important people, those who would have an impact on history, and I followed those orders for millennia without questioning my orders, fully believing that it would shape history, lead it in the right direction. But the people who impact the world aren't always good. At the core, a fact it took me far too long to realize. I was confused at that point in time. It didn't feel like I would have any important impact on history, so I asked the only question I could. So you think I'll have an important impact on the world? He shook his head. I cannot define importance, nor external beauty, nor fairness. I abandoned my post because I stopped believing in it. That is why I deteriorate each time I visit you. I am not supposed to protect you. So why do you? Because you are a good person. Good enough to let other people suffer? I asked, getting angrier by the minute. He looked at me in confusion, as if his past actions hadn't allowed other people to get hurt, to even die. I do not understand. What did you do to Jennifer? I demanded to know. She had been a horrifying nightmare during the last couple years. But did her torture warrant whatever the angel had done? I only made her see what she truly is, he said. And what is that? Someone with darkness in their heart. I shook my head in a mixture of sadness and anger. What's going to happen to her? That does not matter. Yes, it does. The truth about herself will weigh her down, and she'll eventually give up on herself, because the only thing she sees in the mirror is her own soul. Her life will end by her own hand. We stared at each other in silence. Despite no words being spoken, we communicated. The angel showed me visions of the future, the pain I would go through because of the evil in people's hearts, and he showed me that all of it could be fixed if I only allowed him to help me. I won't let you do this. Stop it, right now. I have to protect you. Not like this. You care about her, despite what she has done? I thought about the statement for a while. Of course, she meant nothing to me, but letting someone kill themselves so I could avoid discomfort was a disturbing thought. Whatever you did, undo it. This is not how I want to deal with my problems. So her actions should not be punished? She is a kid like me. She can still change. He acknowledged my demand, and I could tell he was about to leave. Wait! I rummaged through my drawer to look for my old things. After a minute, I pulled out the swan plushie from my childhood. By then its color had faded, and each limb was partially torn. This is for you. To remind you that just because something is broken, it doesn't mean it's not beautiful, and it doesn't mean it can't be fixed. With that, he disappeared once more. Over the next decade, he appeared a couple times, but never got close enough for us to exchange words. Even from a distance, I could tell he was falling to pieces, degenerating more with each appearance. Though my life never felt threatened, I know he must have done something to save my life. I'm not even sure I want to know. Only hints of dangerous things would let me know that there are horrors in this world around each corner. And if we knew half of it, we'd probably be too terrified to even leave our homes. I started wondering if everyone had their own angel like mine, one that had abandoned their post in order to protect insignificant but decent people. It wouldn't be until the summer of 2018 we would come close enough to even exchange words, and as I now know, it would be for the very last time. A simple night out after years of coming to terms with my past. I had gotten an education, a job, and even a few friends. Life had become bearable. We decided to hit the clubs. My friends insisted I try something new, but I left early. Clubs were really not my scene. But it's not always safe to go home alone at night. It's not safe when people think you're an easy target. As I crossed the empty street, a heavily dressed stranger approached me. He was wearing a hoodie, just enough to make it impossible to identify him, and it immediately made me uncomfortable. He bumped into me and demanded that I handed over my wallet. As he did, I felt something hard press against my side, either a knife or a gun. I was never good at identifying those things, but I feared for my life. Immediately after feeling panic set in, I saw my angel appear before the both of us. He was missing a leg, and half his face had started to slough off. The mugger screamed in horror and froze. My memories shot back to my paralyzed father being torn apart by the angel. But this time, nothing happened. The mugger simply stood frozen in place for a minute. I will not kill him, but he will be in a great deal of pain when he wakes up. The mugger fell limp to the ground, a few drops of blood seeping from his nose and ears. As soon as the threat was eliminated, the angel collapsed as well. He was falling apart. I ran over and embraced what remained of him in my arms. I wanted to say something, provide a few words of comfort, but nothing came out. Do you remember the name you gave me? I thought back to our first meeting. It was just a stupid thought by a 5-year-old girl, but I remembered. Yes, I called you Gary. He smiled at me. That is a good name. Thank you, I said as tears started forming in my eyes. His flesh tore apart under my fingers, just disintegrating as I held his hand, leaving behind pieces of flesh and bone fragments. Please, tell me how I can save you. I have lived for thousands of years, and only by helping you was it worth anything. I made my choice. The question is, will you accept? Accept what? I chose you for a reason. The world needs someone to keep them safe. Normal people, just trying to get through life. I knew what he was suggesting. He wanted me to become an angel like him, to help others in need. How would I even do that? You just have to say yes. His face started to fall apart, jaw falling off, leaving him unable to speak. All he did was reach out his hand. In it, he held the swan I had given him years earlier. That would be his final act before he passed. I cried, holding my angel's dead body. He had kept me safe my entire life, and for the first time ever, I was truly alone, wondering what even happens to angels as they die. It has been 1 month since I last saw Gary, and since then I have tried to make a choice. If I decide to leave my life behind, I figure I won't disintegrate like him, seeing as I haven't betrayed any higher power. Life has been hard, and it has left much to be desired, and if I leave now, I'll never live a happy life. But I can spend the rest of eternity protecting the less fortunate people of this world. I guess no one here will ever see me again, not after I leave. In fact, I'm not entirely sure how all of this will work, but I suppose I'll have all of eternity to figure it out. One thing is for sure, if anyone ever needs me, I'll be there. My Brother Was a Sleepwalker, a story written by GearsZam. A link to their original Reddit post will be available in the description down below. Growing up with the sleepwalker in the family gets old pretty fast. At first, everyone is a bit concerned that they'll hurt themselves or wander out of the house. These fears aren't unwarranted. The sleepwalker isn't aware of their actions, and everyone else is usually, well, asleep. We only discovered my little brother was an apparent sleepwalker when we kept waking up to all of the doors and windows open in the morning. Since we live in a rural area, this wasn't too much of a danger, beyond potential wild animals roaming in. Still, as the older sibling, my parents designated me as the official keeper of my brother's actions. We shared a room, you see, and they wanted to use that to my advantage when it came to retrieving and sending my brother back to bed. The common saying of "don't wake a sleepwalker" isn't as big a deal as you think, as long as you wake them up gently and they're aware of their condition. They're not going to hurt themselves or be startled. Why would they be? They've just woken up after all. First, we tried bells on the door. When that failed to wake me up, my parents tried leaving plastic sheets on the floor. We tried just about everything you could possibly think of to try and alert me when he got up. And that was when my father came up with the idea of a string. Every night, my brother and I would tie a long string to our wrists and go to sleep like that. If he got up at any point, the tugging of him exiting the room woke me pretty quickly. It was a harmless, noiseless, flawless plan that had me bringing my brother to bed long before he opened our home to the elements and animals outside. You get used to it. The string, the tugging, retrieving the sleepwalker, and putting them back to bed. Some nights he would get up more than once, and others he wouldn't sleepwalk at all. Either way, that was the only variance in an otherwise rigid routine we had. There was no spooky words out of his mouth during his sleep, no strange place he kept going back to, and no motive behind opening the doors and windows. When asked, my brother simply stated that his dream was unrelated and he didn't know why he would open the home. This went on for better part of a year before finally dying down. We gradually stopped tying the strings to our arms before sleep because my brother stopped getting up. One night in late July, I remembered going to bed a bit earlier than usual after we took a trip down to the river for the day. Naturally, I was exhausted from an afternoon of paddling against the current and running around the nearby park with other kids my age. At some point during the night, I woke up, having become a very light sleeper, thanks to my duty as watchful eye over my brother in the last year. I remembered feeling hot and sticky thanks to the humid weather. Getting up and opening the window, flipping the fan on and hoping that some air circulation might help. But when I turned to go back to bed, I saw my door was cracked open about 2 inches wide. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized there was something else as well. A face. Just beyond the threshold of the door, a small face was pressed up to the crack, one big brown eye staring at me lazily. My fear turned into frustration in an instant, when I realized I was looking at my brother, who was standing completely still outside the door and more than likely sleepwalking again. With a deep breath, I gathered myself and grabbed the door handle. Go back to bed. Jesus Christ, can't you just be normal for one night? And then I slammed the door shut and returned to bed. It was mean, but I was just getting tired of it, you know? After a long day, I just wanted to sleep. And if he was just going to stand out there all night, then it wasn't my problem. The next morning was nothing special. My mom made breakfast as we sat down at the table. I noticed my brother wasn't up yet. That was weird. He was always an early riser and eager to greet the day. I'm guessing Joe is sleeping in today, I asked, idly picking and stabbing at my waffles. My dad set down his coffee and looked up from his paper, his brow crinkled in confusion. Joe went to stay at Andy's house last night, he said. Then slowly his face softened again and he chuckled. You went to bed early, so you couldn't know. Suddenly, I wasn't very hungry. My stomach flipped and my throat felt tight. When did he go? Shortly after you went to bed, when we got back. I didn't tell my parents what I saw, worried that maybe something was now wrong with me. Instead, when my little brother came home later that day, I elected to reinstate the string system just as a precaution. Joe seemed confused, but was compliant, joking about how we're tied together forever. It was a strange comfort in a way. The string was reliable, predictable, and that it was for the next few months, Joe and I both slept soundly, with few sleepwalking incidents. I was thinking about dismissing the string again, but decided that just one more night wouldn't hurt either of us. Just to make sure he wasn't getting up and wandering off. And it had become a source of a handful of inside jokes for us. Sibling bonding time, that kind of stuff. I think we both almost slept better when it was on as well. I woke up to a harsh tug on my arm suddenly. It was pitch black besides my alarm clock nearby, which read the time at 2:25 a.m. That wasn't the usual time Joe got up if he did sleepwalk, but variations could happen, and with a sigh, I began to throw my covers off and slide out of bed. That was when the second hard yank on the string nearly sent me tumbling to the floor, and I found my anger welling up pretty quickly. I thought he must have gotten the stupid string caught on something and was trying to pry himself loose, so I collected myself and hurried towards the door that was already open. That was when I noticed something was wrong. The string was only long enough to keep us maybe 5 feet apart at the most, but this string was longer, and it pulled taut down the hallway and around the corner. Joe? I called quietly. This didn't feel right at all, but I made my way down the hall and turned the corner just in time for a third tug on the string. It was leading into the kitchen, which featured a door to the basement that was now wide open as well. The string was descending into it, and the tugging beyond it was growing more intense, impatient. This wasn't like Joe at all. He had never gone in the basement before, let alone manually pull on the string. Joe, are you awake? This isn't funny. I was louder this time, inching towards the open door as the string began to frantically vibrate and yank, as if urging me further. The closer I got, the more excited it grew, and when I reached the doorway, the next tug was so harsh that I almost lost my balance again. There was a lull in the tugging when I heard a door opening behind me. The bathroom across the hall from my room. A bleary-eyed Joe stepped out and blinked, one hand rubbing his eye as he yawned. There was no string on his wrist. Suddenly, the string began to pull with a force stronger than before, making me stagger out onto the first step leading into the basement with a yell. Joe seemed to realize that I had the string on my wrist, and he didn't, and that whomever or whatever was in the basement was not him. There was a roar of noise, a low moaning from the darkness of the basement, and my little brother's frantic footfalls behind me as he ran his way over and grabbed my free arm to hold me while he scrambled for something to cut the string. I heard the kitchen drawers crashing open as he searched, and then he produced a knife, one shaky hand sawing at the string as the noise in the basement became so loud it seemed to reverberate through our bones. And then the tugging stopped. The string snapped away, and both Joe and I fell backwards onto our butts, sprawling over the kitchen floor. The noise ceased when the string was cut, and the basement door wobbled violently before slamming shut in our faces. Going to sleep after that was impossible, so Joe and I huddled up in my bed and sat with every possible light on in our room until the sun rose and our parents got up. Naturally, they didn't believe us, saying they hadn't heard a thing and slept soundly. They said that we must have hallucinated together, or both been sleepwalking even. Either way, I know that whatever was in the basement was not my brother, and I've refused to tie the string to my wrist ever again. Skin Thief, a story written by lifeisstrangemetoo. A link to the original Reddit post will be available in the description down below. Don't move a muscle. The words whispered in my ear roused me from my sleep. After a brief moment of confusion, I recognized the voice as that of my wife. He's been standing there for God knows how long. I think he's waiting for us to wake up. I opened my eyes just a crack, and I saw what had startled my wife. There, at the foot of the bed, was a man. He was large, over 6 feet tall by a head. He wore a rubber mask of a cartoon dog with red, bloodshot eyes. Gripped in his left hand was a duffel bag, which clattered with the sound of metal on metal whenever it shifted in his grip. His right hand held a video camera. At the sight of him, my heart instantly began to race. My brain yelled at me to get up and run, but I forced myself to stay completely still. I became lightheaded as my slow breathing could not keep up with the demands of my racing heart. The phone was on the nightstand just inches away. Would I have time to unlock it and dial 911 before the stranger got to me? Would it even matter if I did? One thing was clear. I couldn't just lay there. I had to act. As quick as I could, I lunged out of bed and threw myself at the man. He was too quick for me, though. He dropped his bag and shoved me back onto the bed. I knelt down and began rummaging inside his bag. He pulled out a long metal rod. He clicked something on the side, and the end of the rod erupted in a crackling shower of sparks. He walked towards me slowly, taking his time. I knew I only had one shot, so I waited. He was almost close enough to reach me now. The rod blazed with electricity. When he was close enough, I kicked out as hard as I could, connecting with his shin. He let out a strangled cry of pain and staggered back, dropping the rod. I snatched it up and fumbled for the switch. I couldn't find it. The man pushed himself to a knee. I felt a button, small and rubber. I pushed it in, and the end of the rod lit up. I jammed it into his stomach, and he fell back, convulsing. After a few seconds, he went still. I used the rod to push the mask up and reveal his face. "Boo!" he shouted. My heart jumped out of my chest for just a moment. It settled down only a little when I recognized him. It was my brother. He was sitting up and grinning. He rubbed his shin and winced. "Gotcha," he said. "What the hell is the matter with you?" I yelled. "You could have given me a heart attack." My brother shrugged. "It's Halloween," he said. "What was the matter with you last year when you left that fake horse head in my bed?" I held up the rod. "And this?" I said. "Olson's magic shop," he replied. "You'd better apologize," I said. "I'm sorry, you're a pansy," he replied. He turned to my wife. "I actually am sorry to you," he said. "Sandy said you'd be out of town." "Didn't you see me?" said my wife. My brother scratched his neck sheepishly. "Not really," he said. "It's impossible to see anything in that dog mask." "Just get him out," I said. "We'll talk about this tomorrow. And leave your spare key." "Can I have the rod back?" "No." Feigning hurt, my brother left. I was still seeing red. I struggled to calm myself down enough to see to my wife. "Are you okay, honey?" I asked. She shook her head. "Can you get me a glass of water from downstairs?" she asked. I nodded. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and flicked on the flashlight to help me guide myself down the stairs. I had just reached the kitchen when a phone call came through. "Oh God, oh God, oh God!" The words tumbled out in a breathless panic. "You have to help me. They think I'm crazy. They want to lock me up." Her voice was tense, strained like a guitar string a moment away from snapping. "Slow down," I said. "What are you talking about?" "We were just laying in bed," she breathed. "And this thing came in through the window, out of nowhere, you know? Out of nowhere. It was just a shadow, a man's shadow. Derek tried to fight it, but... oh God, Derek, it killed Derek." Sandy's voice trailed off. "And then what?" I said, breathless. "What happened?" "It absorbed him," Sandy said. "And then it looked just like him." "Oh God," I said. I dropped the phone and sprinted upstairs where my brother Derek had just been. The window was open, and my wife was gone. Behind the Shower Curtain, a story written by C.J Cannatelli. Links to her website and social media will be available in the description down below. Even as a young girl, as far back as my memory goes, I have always checked behind the shower curtain any time I entered a bathroom. I don't understand it. I've never been afraid of the dark, monsters under my bed, or even horror movies for that matter. I was never a frightened little girl. My whole family and all my friends actually called me things like brave and fearless my entire life. I suppose I still have that type of reputation. But alas, I always check behind the shower curtain when entering a bathroom. I've done it since I could walk. It's one of my first memories. Every time I enter a bathroom, anxiety floods through my body and I freeze up for a moment. In a wild burst of adrenaline that never seems to fail me, I harshly fling aside the shower curtain and find an empty bathtub. I would always sigh with relief, chuckle quietly, and go about whatever business I had in the bathroom. It wasn't even only when I was going to shower or use the toilet. It was every single time I entered the bathroom, without fail. If I had to get something from the medicine cabinet, I had to check behind the shower curtain. If I had to blow my nose, I had to check behind the shower curtain. It's something that is so deeply ingrained in me that I don't think I'll ever be able to enter a bathroom and not look behind the shower curtain, especially considering what I saw there when I was 9 years old. My father took off when my mom got pregnant with me. I've never met him, and I don't have any plans on meeting him in the future. I'm in my mid-20s now, and these memories would have faded at least somewhat if I could ever allow myself to break free of my ritualistic shower surveillance. I still do it, and now I know I always will. I still feel a wave of terror rush over me when I enter a bathroom and remember I have to check. I've tried not checking, but I always cave before a moment even passes. I always talk myself out of not checking. What if there's a person? What if there's a monster? What if a raccoon is in there? I think of every possible scenario, mostly ridiculous and impossible, but others somewhat probable, while still being significantly unlucky. I imagine all kinds of things waiting for me behind the dreaded curtain. There's only ever been one time in my entire life that I flung that curtain aside to see something absolutely horrifying. I always wondered what I would do if something was actually in there. I suppose when it happened, I froze up for a second or two. Not that it made much of a difference in the end. But if it had been a serial killer or a monster, these precious seconds could have cost me my life. I remember that day so vividly, and my therapist says I'll always remember it like it just happened yesterday. I walked up the stairs, arriving home from my long day of school. I began to go into the bathroom, but I stopped. I always put off using the bathroom because it was this entire ritual of checking behind the shower curtain. I put it off, stifling the urge to pee. I went back downstairs and grabbed a candy bar from the snack drawer. Eating it carefully, I turned on the television and remembered Tom and Jerry being on for just a second. By the time I finished my 3 bites of chocolate, the show was on the credits, and the 3 o'clock Bugs Bunny show was almost on. I decided that if I didn't want to miss it, I had to run upstairs to the bathroom. I darted up the stairs, realizing I only had a short commercial break to do my business. Arriving in the bathroom, I lifted my hand to the light switch, but dropped my hand to my side. The bathroom's window was letting in a bright afternoon light, and I didn't really need to turn on the light. It was so bright in the bathroom that it just wasn't necessary. Natural lighting always had the way of making me feel braver. I hesitated before reaching for the shower curtain. Could today possibly be the day I could just not look behind the shower curtain? I stared at it for a moment and giggled to myself nervously. Not today, I thought silently. I'm gonna be 10 in a few weeks. I've got to learn how to be brave, even when no one is looking. For the first and only time in my life, I pulled down my pants and sat on the toilet. I couldn't get myself to pee because I kept thinking about what could possibly be behind the shower curtain. I knew if I could just get this over with, that would be a conquered fear, and it would give me a sense of accomplishment. Finally, I let the stream of urine go, and my thoughts drifted to my D+ in history on my report card. I dreaded showing my mother. Mother. As I stood up and pulled my pants up around my waist, I began to think about my mom. Where was she? She was normally waiting downstairs for me when I got home. I began to think maybe she had plans to go out today, and I just didn't remember her telling me. It was strange, but it wouldn't be the first time something like that happened. Then again, I didn't worry about being home alone. It was the late 1980s, and people in my neighborhood left their kids home alone all the time. Hell, we didn't even lock our doors. It just wasn't something we thought about at the time. I washed my hands, and as I turned off the water, I heard a sound coming from the bathtub. I whirled around and nearly jumped out of my skin. I realized I heard the quiet tap of water dripping into a pool of water. Maybe Mother had left the bathtub dripping? Then it hit me. It didn't sound like a drop or two of water hitting the bottom of an empty bathtub. It sounded familiar, like the tap dripping when I was sitting in a full bath. The color drained from my face, and after a moment of deliberation, I remembered something. Mom was supposed to clean this morning. Maybe she left the bathtub soaking in bleach like she sometimes did. The bleach wasn't burning my nose though, so that was ruled out. Maybe she left the bucket she used for mopping the floors filled underneath the dripping tap. I couldn't be sure, and there was really only one way to find out. Putting on my bravest face, I reached a quivering hand up to grab the floral shower curtain. In one quick movement, I flung the curtain open, stumbling backward against the sink like I sometimes did. It was like my brain couldn't process what I was seeing, and everything just kind of froze up on me for a minute or two. The bathtub was filled with a deep red liquid. I knew it was blood, but I was trying to rationalize some other explanation. Then I looked at the end of the tub, and I saw what appeared to be hair. I realized it was a head, bobbing up and down slowly in the pool of blood. Then I looked a bit closer and let out a loud shriek. It wasn't just a head, it was my mother's head. It was my mother's head attached to her pale, lifeless corpse. And so I screamed. I screamed and screamed until my throat became raspy and dry as the Sahara. When I finally got my legs to move, I began running down the hallway and down the stairs. I fell about halfway down, tripping over my own shoes. I landed at the bottom on my back and felt the wind get knocked right out of me. My front door swung open, and Mrs. Belton from next door ran to my side. Beatrice, what's all the screaming?" She ran to my side and helped me up. "Are you all right? Did you get hurt? Where's your mother?" I couldn't answer her. I raised a trembling finger and pointed up the stairs to the bathroom door. Then I screamed and screamed some more, tears rushing down both sides of my face. Mrs. Belton ran up the stairs, and I heard her gasp when she reached the bathroom door. She saw what I had seen and came running down the stairs, grabbing me by the arm and yanking me out of the house. Before I knew it, fire trucks, 3 police cars, and 2 ambulances were blocking off my street. All the neighborhood kids watched my mother's body get wheeled out on a gurney, but it was covered in a black bag. The paramedics at one of the ambulances were checking me out. I had a big bruise on my back from falling, and I had hit the back of my head, which was bleeding a little bit. When a crisis worker showed up, she talked to me for a little while, but I couldn't answer her. I couldn't move or speak at all. She said something about inpatient care, and the ambulance took me to a building with a white hospital room. They hooked all these needles into my arm and had me lay down. They said they put something in the needle to make me sleep for a while, and the last thing I remember seeing was Mr. and Mrs. Belton with their twin boys rushing into the room. Everything went black after that. After a few hours, I woke and was sent home with the Belton family. They lived right next door to where I had lived, and after a few weeks, they had packed up everything to move me into their new house across town. Mrs. Belton promised that they were planning to move anyway, but I heard Mr. and Mrs. Belton talking in the kitchen in hushed whispers about a mortgage they couldn't afford, all to get me away from the neighborhood. They took me in and raised me like their own. We didn't talk about my mother's suicide until after I graduated from college. To this day, no one knows why she did it. She didn't leave a note. She didn't act differently. There were simply no clues as to what could have driven my mother to slit her wrists in the tub that afternoon. And I suppose I don't want to know why she did it. Sure, there's this nagging in the back of my mind every now and again that leaves me wondering if it was my fault. The Beltons always assure me that my mother was having a midlife crisis and that it had nothing to do with me. I still find that all very hard to believe, but I get by just fine. I have a great life. I just have to go to therapy once a week, and I always have to check behind the shower curtain. I'll probably be doing that for the rest of my natural life. There's Something Wrong with My Daughter, a story written by Newtown Jam. A link to the original Reddit post will be available in the description down below. There's something wrong with my daughter. Seriously wrong. I remember the day she was born. It was windy and raining. Middle of the night and a full moon. I don't know if that has any significance, but maybe. She was perfect, absolutely beautiful. I was a young mom and gave birth to her at 17. She changed my whole life. Looking at her perfect round blue eyes and those tiny little fingers made me feel things I never thought possible. I really did love her. She didn't cry when she was born, just stayed serene and relaxed. I panicked at first, but the hospital staff assured me she was healthy and breathing. I couldn't believe my luck. A perfect, quiet baby. I couldn't have been more wrong. I first noticed it when she was a week old. The fact that she hadn't cried once. She just cooed and gurgled, but no crying or screaming. It started to really freak me out. What if something was wrong with my perfect baby? But health visitors assured me she was fine, even calling her the happiest baby they had ever seen. But I knew she wasn't happy. I can't explain it. I just knew. Whenever I picked her up or tried to cuddle her, I could feel any part of me that touched her tingle. It wasn't a pleasant tingle, more like pins and needles, painful and paralyzing. I stopped picking her up altogether, pretty fast. I lived with my mom at the time. My daughter's dad was a teenager. who had very little interest as soon as I became pregnant. I felt so alone. My mom kept telling me I was doing a bad job, that I should be more loving, pick her up more, cuddle her, sing to her. I didn't even want to look at her. People did everything they could to make me feel like there was something wrong with me. Friends came over to meet her and couldn't understand why I didn't want to feed her or be close to her in any way. They all told me to go and get help, but they didn't understand. My baby hated me. I was out walking with her once, when she was about 6 months old, and a car driving alongside us lost control, mounted the curb, and knocked me over. The driver hit a tree and a stop sign in the process, but the pram was left exactly where it was. Not a scratch and no crying. Any normal baby would have cried. When I was laid in the ambulance, the paramedic brought her to see me. She must have thought I'd be comforted to see my daughter was unharmed. I wasn't, and I swear that I could see a smile in her tiny eyes, like she was happy to see me hurt. When I told my mom how I felt, she told me I was crazy. Just like everyone else, she thought the problem was with me and me alone. I know how it all sounds, and I really tried to get better. I took antidepressants that the doctor prescribed and went to groups, listened to women much older than me complain that they couldn't bond with their kids. I didn't feel like that. I felt scared of her, like she wasn't even mine to begin with, just here to make my life miserable. Then, when she started walking and talking, she started young, about 18 months old. That's when other people started to notice what I had her whole life. The first bad incident was thankfully not with me. Her dad had decided to take a sudden interest in her life. I think this had been prompted by his mother, but I was grateful for the break, and she went to stay at his for the night. It was bliss. My room, without her in it, felt lighter, like a real darkness had been lifted, and I could be myself again. I relaxed, watched a movie, and ate snacks until I got a phone call around 2 a.m. Apparently, he had made up her bed next to his and tried to play with her toys with her. In the evening, she wasn't particularly interested, but he thought because she didn't know him very well. She was being shy. He told me that the only thing she wanted to do was watch the tropical fish tank in his lounge, so he let her camp out there for the night. He came downstairs for a drink about half an hour before calling me, to discover our daughter using a pencil to stab through the fish and pull them out of the tank. As he caught her, she was about halfway through eating one, bones and all. When he tried to take the pencil off her, she stabbed him in the arm with it and bit his face. He had visible marks across his face considering she was so small and had only just cut her baby teeth. It should have been physically impossible for her to do so much damage. But she did it. And still, my mum insisted it was my fault. Her behavior was due to my non-maternal nature, and she only acted out because I left her with a practical stranger. Now acting out, I'd accept. But what she had done wasn't typical of even severely abused kids. Even if I had emotionally neglected her, how did she not choke on the little fish bones? Why was she so violent? That incident seemed to flip a switch. The tears I had longed for when she was a baby came in full force, tantrums that could start a tornado, She would trash the house, always when my mom was out. She knew how to make me look crazy. She even smashed every photo frame, vase, and object that she could get her hands on, often attempting to hit me with them in the process. Her strength was remarkable. I swear my mom thought I did it. She hit me, pulled my hair, and told me she hated me every day. That hurts coming from someone who can't say much else. Come to think of it, I don't think I've ever once heard her say she loves me. I was at a complete loss. I took her to the doctors, and she behaved impeccably. She was an angel for my mother. I had no idea what to do. It continued for months. Then she turned 2 and hit what should have been the terrible 2s. But she calmed down. The tantrums stopped, and her language skills got better. Much better than any 2-year-old I've met. She started to make up imaginary friends. This was another thing that my mom insisted was normal, but there was something different about her imaginary friends. I could actually hear them. They just left when other people were there. There were 3. Lucy was a little girl, a bit older than her, who enjoyed helping her wreck things. My daughter described her as dirty, with big curly hair. Her voice was sweet and mischievous. She sounded like a normal little girl. I'd hear my daughter playing with Lucy in her room, and generally feel safe. Kelly didn't make me feel half as safe. She was older. My daughter said she was old like Nana and wore a dark dress. I heard her for the first time while I was in the kitchen, and she was in the lounge. An older woman's voice telling my tiny daughter that she didn't need a mummy telling her what to do. I tried to answer the voice a few times, but she always ignored me. She spoke in a malicious whisper whenever Kelly was around. I was terrified. The 3rd was by far the worst of all. His name was Elgar, and she said he was a monster, with black eyes, spikes, and a black hat. Elgar never spoke properly, just made a series of noises. My daughter was the most difficult to deal with when she was playing with Elgar. Her dad's fish tank wasn't the only time I found her eating things alive. When Elgar was around, I would often find her stuffing bugs into her mouth. Most disturbingly, a spider with eggs on its back that burst as she bit into it. There were tiny spiders everywhere. I'm not even ashamed to admit that I just left her and locked myself into the bathroom until it was quiet. Kelly managed to convince her to bite and stab me a few times. After 12 stitches, I had to put a lock on anything sharp. The imaginary friends started to make life completely impossible. I knew they wanted me gone, all of them. Even Lucy always wanted to cause trouble. I lived like it for an entire year, genuinely scared for my life every hour I spent with my 2-year-old. When her 3rd birthday rolled around, I was at the end of my tether. I was exhausted, defeated, and pretty destroyed. I was 20 years old and never pictured my life like that. My mom decided to throw her a party. My own mom pretty much hated me by this stage. She never saw what I saw. Her grandbaby was never anything but a perfect angel in her eyes. She tried so hard to parent on my behalf, to give her everything she thought she deserved. It was windy, just like the day she was born. There were loads of kids from the local area running around the garden. My mom put a little pink bow in my daughter's hair. She looked kind of cute For a monster, anyway. I don't know what happened. Maybe Elgar came to the party. Maybe she's just evil. Either way, the party went badly. Another kid grabbed hold of a doll she was playing with, and my daughter went mad. She smacked the little boy to the ground and bit him furiously. His parents were screaming at me, and my mom was shouting at them to control their child. Mom grabbed my daughter and tried to wrench her off the other child. He was covered in blood and bite marks. By this stage, she attacked my mom, her grandma, so violently that she fell and hit her head on the concrete garden steps. My mom died that day, all because of that monster I spawned in my womb. When I told her Nana had gone to heaven, she told me that wasn't where I was going. When she hurt me bad enough that I stopped, it made me feel sick. And that brings me to tonight. It's been 6 weeks since my mother died, and there's nothing that stops her evil now. No one left visiting that she would bother to hide her nature in front of. Kelly's been really hammering in the kill her message for the last 3 days, and I've spent 2 of them locked in my bedroom, peeing in a bucket to avoid my 3-year-old daughter. I'm desperate now. I have no one else to turn to, and I heard her tell Kelly, "Today's the day," earlier. Elgar has been breathing heavily by the door for the last 2 hours. Oh God, she's just started knocking. Self-Checkout, a story written by Pathological-ire. A link to their original Reddit post will be available in the description down below. It's not great, our part of town. This being the case, it's also prime real estate. That's the way it works. The creative types move into the not-so-great parts of town because, well, they're cheap. Then those creative types try and make them a little more suited to their tastes. So a few of them will start up coffee shops, galleries, cooperative spaces, and such. Then the area has a vibe. It's cool. Then the chains and investors catch on, buying up land, building new apartment complexes, pushing the creatives who didn't get a foot in the door out, and leave the locals, who always live there, wondering what the hell all these rich folks are doing in their hellhole area. And that's regeneration. Then it's the wine bars, offices, architecture, and design studios, avocados and such. Articles are written in trendy magazines about the new openings, and the whole place looks different. They keep the graffiti up and stick nice lights under the old railway arches that used to be crack dens. And the artists complain about the lights, despite the fact that they never tried smoking crack down there. Never smoked crack at all. Freaking artists. Anyway, this is what was going to happen to our part of town. We weren't there yet, though. We had had a few mini supermarket branches move in on the high street. They were already competing for the narrative. Was this going to be an upmarket high street for the rich folk, or a cheap and cheerful area for the trendy folk? It was neither for me and most of the other locals. Everyone shopped at Blessed's. Blessed's was great, run by an old Middle Eastern family that had been there for years. I forget where they're from, somewhere in the Middle East, I guess. Anyway, they had everything you needed, and all the stuff you didn't know you needed. And to top it all off, a good, friendly, personal service. You could kind of judge the folks walking up and down the high street by which shop they entered. Upmarket, downmarket, or Blessed's. So it was sad to see when Mustafa, the owner, closed the door one Tuesday evening and put up a sign saying closed for refurbishment. That's a risk right there, I thought. They didn't need to be refurbished. It was great. All that's going to do is push people through the doors of other stores, where they'll get hooked on branded products and subliminal marketing and pricing structures. There's a whole science to that stuff designed to hook you on and reel you in. Well, it happened anyway, and a week later Blessed's had a nice new backlit sign up and opened its doors once again. I'll admit, it looked nice. They had slick new shelves and fridges, and these nice wooden crates for the fruit, veg, and bakery. That had a kind of farmer's market thing going on. They had gotten rid of the old checkouts with just the one staffed stand for alcohol and tobacco products left. Then there was this new self-checkout machine near the exit. Much cheaper. Mustafa nodded at the machine as I stood there observing the changes. What about Avesta? I asked. Avesta was a lovely young woman, his niece, I think. She used to work at the checkout and was always chatty and helpful in the most endearing way. Beautiful, too. She's studying medicine now. Oh, that's good. That was good. I mean, I'd miss Avesta, but there's more to life than attending a checkout, and if that's what she wanted to do, then good for her. So that was it, the new Blessed's, and despite my initial concerns, it was good. It was about 3 weeks later that I noticed it. What I failed to mention earlier was that part of what gives areas like this their local character is their local characters. And Miss Pendergast, or Miss P, was one such character. She was friendly enough, but something was a little off with her. Upstairs, that is. So I'm in the store at the bakery at about 11 a.m., and Miss P is there at the self-checkouts. No, I won't do that. She was talking to the machine. Stop that right now. I couldn't help but chuckle to myself a little. Those machines were infuriating at the best of times, let alone these less sophisticated models. I looked over at Mustafa, and he was there at the desk with his arm folded, shaking his head slightly, seeming to wonder if he should step in. Well, when? Okay, Miss P, this way. I'll scan them through over here for you. Mustafa ushered her over to his manual register. Miss P moved out, but kept glancing at the machine. Why is it? He scanned through her few items and took the money from her, placing the change in her hand and helping her out the door with the little trolley she pushed around. She glared at the machine once more before heading off down the road. I took my few items straight to Mustafa's manual register. We shared a look as if to say, "Yep, that's Miss P," but neither of us said it. It wasn't until later that evening, as I lay in bed thinking about the incident with Miss P, that I got to wondering, who was she even talking to? I've had little conversations with self-checkouts before, but it's normally because it's saying something like, "Please place the bag in the bagging area," or something like that, and I'm saying, "It's in the bagging area, you idiot," or something like that. But the Blessed's machines didn't talk at all. They weren't all that good. They just displayed a few instructions on a touchpad, and that was it. Miss P wasn't reading anything. She hadn't even scanned an item. It was sad. She must have been quite disturbed. Poor woman. I'd try and help her out next time rather than laugh at her. But there wasn't a next time. A few days later, I was at the store once again, same as usual. Mustafa was there at the till, and I took my few items up to him. "Did you hear about Miss P?" I hadn't. "She passed away here last week." "What?" "Yeah, right in front of the store." "How?" "Hit by a vehicle." "Oh my God, was it speeding?" "I don't think so. She just ran at it." "She ran?" "Yeah, sprinted out of the store and into the road." "Sprinted?" "Yeah, I know. I can show you if you really want. It didn't get it all, but..." Show me. I didn't understand. I mean, I could understand that Miss P could get hit by a vehicle. That much makes sense, tragic as it is. But sprinted? Miss P pushed a little cart around that pretty much held her up. She moved at the pace of a snail and must have been around 90 years old. So yeah, horrible as it was, I needed to see this. Mustafa ushered me round to the side of the register where he had his little laptop to watch his shows and to video call those relatives back in that Middle Eastern country I couldn't put my finger on. He brought up a video file containing the store's security footage. There she was, Miss P. She's at the checkout machine again. Her trolley there, next to her. She's staring into the scanning table. Mustafa skips it forward. She's there for 3 minutes. Did she say anything? Not a word. Look. There's Mustafa there. He's saying something from behind the till, asking if she's okay probably. He moves around the till to approach her. As fast as anything, Miss P barges Mustafa out of the way, knocking him backwards into the front of the counter. Then she bolts out the door, like an athlete. At the very top of the screen, you can just see the bottom of the car connect with her, the base of her shadow landing slumped at the top of the frame as people gathered around. Oh my God. Yeah. Are you okay? Yeah, I was fine. Just so sad, you know. Yeah. And that was it. The last we saw of Miss P. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Miss P in those last moments. What did she see there? Where did that energy come from? Well, the next day, I went down to Blessed's again. I knew I was being crazy, but I just had to test something, just to be sure. I waited across the street for a while until the customers died down and emptied out. Eventually, Mustafa went to go round the back to start placing stock. I knew he'd notice me, but I wanted a little space to myself. I went in. Mustafa was up one of the aisles and looked along to me. I gave him a wave and pretended to look at some stuff so he wouldn't get weirded out and disturb me. I moved towards the machine. The flat scanning bed had a glass panel on top. Underneath, there was a glowing red light. I inched closer. There was a chamber in there, with this spinning prism inside that reflected the red beam. It was hypnotic and beautiful, hard to look away. The walls of my vision began to close in. That prism was spinning so fast, that red beam, the space around me darkened, and that prism spinning so fast, I felt I was in that chamber with the prism. That deep red light reflecting through the prism, that voice emanating from all around. Please place your items in the bagging area. I was so small, I tried to call out, but I don't have any items. Then again that voice. Please place your item in the bagging area. What item? I don't have any. Place item in bagging area. The light grew redder still, burning through me. Through the prism, the chamber closed in. The prism grew nearer. I had no items. There was nowhere else to look, no space to move, no items scanned. And the prism. Put your head in the bag. Then the light was gone. I was moving. My legs were running, or kicking. I'm not sure. The air around was becoming tighter. It was closing in. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't breathe. Then darkness. Then a vague light, expanding, opening. There was rice. Rice everywhere. So much rice. I was on the floor. Something was slapping my face. Hey, wake up! Wake up! It was Mustafa. He was slapping my face. I was in the back of Blessed's, by the dry food goods. My head and neck hurt. I couldn't see straight. What happened? You went crazy, my friend. I had to take you down before you hurt yourself. We need to get you to the hospital. No, I'll be okay. I just need to sit down for a minute. Mustafa sat me down with some water. He brought his laptop with him. Look. He placed it on my lap. There was security footage once again. There I was at the checkout, staring into the scanner. After about a minute, I took one of the bags from the side and placed it over my head, tightening around my neck before running straight into the door. Mustafa had seen me moments before. He'd closed the door so I could run out, then choked me out in a headlock before dragging me over to the dry goods and slapping me awake. Oh my God! Yes, my friend, that checkout has to go. He wandered behind the counter, returning with an axe and baseball bat. He handed me the axe and flipped the store sign. Closed for refurbishment. I don't stay up late anymore. A story written by Stephen from Sales. A link to the original Reddit post will be available in the description down below. I used to stay up late as a high school student. I ignored my parents' wishes and stay up way past my bedtime. Teenage rebellion was a lot of effort when you have all honors classes, so you squeeze in what you can. I had a couple of friends I did stuff with. I was involved in the theater, so I got busy. I didn't have a girlfriend, or anything even resembling one due to my complete and total lack of charm. But I stayed busy, and because of my raging hormones and the fire of teenage rebellion, I stayed up late. Now, I don't know if you have ever stayed up late in a building where everyone else is asleep, but it is a certain kind of bliss. You can say anything you want as long as you're quiet enough. Do anything you want as long as you're quiet enough. Go anywhere, eat anything as long as you are quiet. I have spent a great many nights in my room, alone, curled up with the TV on and quiet, laptop on hand as I wrote the next of my stories. Sci-fi, post-apocalyptic, even just regular old fantasy. I've poured it all out onto virtual paper with black pixelated ink and a steady hand. A guy has to have a hobby, right? I'm full of creativity, and the occasional D&D session doesn't exactly quench the thirst for adventure present in a young boy. So I stayed up late, and I made my own adventures. One such night, things changed. The shadows of my home stopped being welcoming. I stopped roaming the floors of my house after dark. I started hearing things, started becoming more withdrawn. I entered my room earlier, stayed up later. Eventually, I couldn't bear the silence, the loneliness. It all climaxed on one night in the fall when the clocks stopped. I am not a strong person. I can lift someone my own weight maybe 50% of the time, and that's generous. So I don't spend a lot of my time being active. I mainly spend my time inside, ignoring people. I've inherited some anxiety from my mother, along with some obsessive-compulsive tendencies. So I tend to remember where I put things and when people mess with them, which they delight in doing. It's like they enjoy seeing me annoyed or something. Oh well, high schoolers, college students, even some adults are just kids anyway. The night started out fairly normal. Mom grabbed a bite to eat on the way home from work, and got me something too. So I gratefully accepted a burger, and sat in my room, my lamp on and the TV quiet. I screwed around, looking through Ask Reddit and such. I looked over at my clock at one point, and noted the time. 2:48. Nice. I thought of the chemistry test I had tomorrow, and sighing, closed my laptop and coiled up its charger. 2:50. I turned the TV off, grimacing at the sudden silence, and set the remote to the side. 2:51. I changed into a pair of sweatpants, balling up my shirt and tossing to the side. 2:57. I flicked my lamp off, laid down and glanced at the luminescent numbers on the clock one last time. 2:59. Cool, I whispered to myself, rolling over. Thoughts about my test running through my head. Will I pass? How hard is it gonna be? You know, those ones. I laid there for what must have been at least 20 minutes, listening to the noises of the night. Birds cawing, rustling in the bushes outside, dogs barking in the distance. I rolled over again, looking at the clock again. When I saw the time, my blood ran cold. 2:59. That couldn't have been right. I was pretty accurate when it came to guessing time. One of the perks of my anxiety allowed. Made, really, me to gauge time really, really accurately. And I knew that it had to have been at least 20 minutes of silence and darkness. Then another thing hit me. I couldn't hear the rest of the house noise. Usually there'd be plenty of little noises here and there, plumbing running the water from the toilet to the great empty it went to, or maybe some creaking as the back door was pushed on by the wind. But tonight, right now, there was nothing. I listened harder, and I realized I couldn't even hear the sounds of nature. The silence was deafening. I could hear my blood rushing in my ears, the movement of my comforter on my skin. I could hear my heart beating out loud, plain as day. I got out of bed, the springs squeaking, as if they were frightened mice, and switched my lamp on. It shone bright for a grand total of 5 seconds, then winked out. Now normally, something like this wouldn't make me lose composure, but the thing is, I could tell it was nothing related to the fuse or outlet, as my clock was still displaying the time. 2:59. I grabbed my flashlight and flicked it on. Surprisingly, it worked. So I strode to my bookshelf and grabbed the most weapon-like thing I could, my pocket knife. Not exactly intimidating, but I just snatched it and held it in my fist, fear shaking my hands. This wasn't my standard night, so I was understandably frightened. I stepped out of my room, taking a last look at the clock. I don't really think I need to tell you what time it was, but I'll say it anyway. 2:59. The rest of the house was still silent, and I figured maybe the breakers in the rest of the house were just tripped by something. That happens, right? So I headed towards the garage, where the fuse box thing was. I was uninterrupted on the way through the darkened hallway, and I felt even more fearful. I could usually hear my mom asleep, snoring away, or my dogs being loud as they are. But nothing. I started to rush and instantly tripped over something. I kept a tight grip on my light, but not my knife, which fell from my hand and put itself in the floor next to my face. I flinched away from it, now visible shaking, I was sure, and sat up, casting my light around for whatever I tripped over. But it was gone. I knew it wasn't my feet, as I could feel something like fur on it. Maybe it had been one of my dogs, but wouldn't I have heard it scrabble away? I scooted away, forgetting my knife and standing up. I proceeded towards the kitchen, then eventually to the garage. In the kitchen, the oven's clock wasn't on, nor was the microwave, which just reinforced my theory about the power. I looked at my phone on the counter and turned the screen on. The time was, you guessed it, 2:59. This made me feel fear as I progressed to the garage. I opened the door and tried the light. Nothing. Figures. So I stepped into the room, looking with my flashlight for the fuse box. That is, until the light went out. I smacked it against my hand, expecting it to flicker to life, but nothing. Suddenly, through the little clothing I had on my body, I could feel the room's temperature. Ice cold. Now, I don't watch a lot of horror shows, but I knew something was up. I have lived in the South for all my life, and there is absolutely no reason an early fall night would be this cold. I shivered, my teeth chattering audibly, and turned around to step back inside. The door wasn't there. I remember, with my foul mouth, I just up and said, "What in the hell?" Now, it wasn't that I could see a bare wall or anything. Quite the opposite. In fact, I couldn't see anything, which unsettled me more. Now the scant light from my bedroom should have been visible, but it wasn't. It wasn't there. My lighthouse, my rock, the little bit of courage I had left was gone, and now I was alone, afraid and blind. I felt my heartbeat quicken, my blood freezing and boiling all at once, my stomach disappearing. I heard a clatter on what felt like the other side of the room, and then the pitter-patter of animal steps. Then a growl. Looking around, panicking now, I couldn't see anything. I fumbled for the light switch and finding it. I switched it off and on again. This time, there was a flicker of light, and I saw the fuse box easily enough on the other side of the room. That's when I saw it. It was a large, black, dog-like thing with greasy, oily fur. It had green eyes, almost human in their sockets. I saw near me, in the newfound light, was sitting a plant pot. Dropping my flashlight, which flickered on as it hit the ground, snatched the pot and threw it at the thing. The ceramic pot bounced off the thing and slid to the side near the fuse box, while it skittered away out of the light's range, and I instantly dashed for the fuse box in a full-on sprint now. The garage seemed too long, too much ground to cover, but I was suddenly there, only a few feet away from the salvation of sweet, sweet light. Then my knees buckled as it slammed into my legs. I rolled over and kicked, screaming out into the silence. It was hissing into my face. One almost fluid mass on my body holding me down, with those eyes staring into me. I screamed again, and hit it in what seemed to be the face. It reared back and skittered away, letting me whip around and claw at the fuse box. I flipped every single one into the on position and huddled up against the wall, breathing short and ragged gasps. I got up. It was gone. Leaving the garage, I left the light on until I could slam the door shut and lock it behind me. I did so, with every other room in the house until I grabbed my knife from the living room floor. Then I backed myself into my room and pushed my bookshelf against my door. Nothing else, not tonight. Climbing into my bed, satisfied that I wasn't going to be interrupted anymore, I turned my lamp back on, the lights staying on this time, and grabbed my TV remote. I flicked my TV on and queued up another episode of The Office, calming myself down. There was never a chance to enjoy it, as suddenly my clock let out a little beep. Then the lamp and TV went out. I instantly turned to see the time. 3 o'clock. I don't stay up late. Not anymore. Homeless and Helpless, a story written by Dan My Boy 132. A link to the original Reddit post will be available in the description down below. I'm 29 now, and in a great home with my partner of 6 years. We are very happy, but life wasn't always so great. I went through a tough time at the age of 17. I found myself homeless in the streets of Glasgow. It was cold, and I had seen another side of life, a side I never want to see again. It all started with me leaving the family home due to disagreements with my mom. I slept rough for a few nights, hidden out the way under a staircase in the city center, ironically across from a 5-star hotel. I eventually heard about a place I could go live. This was sort of a halfway house between being homeless, then rehomed. I quickly moved into this building. You got breakfast in the morning, and you were advised to keep yourself busy during the day. I tried going on lawn walks, etc. Eventually, you get sucked into socializing with some people at first. I thought this would be okay, but things quickly went south. I befriended my neighbor in the facility. He used drugs, and I didn't. I tried to play it cool, but things got scary quickly. He started asking me for money I didn't have. Then he persisted in following me everywhere. I went like an unwanted sidekick. I woke up one night to banging on the room door. This place held about 10 people, small rooms with basic amenities. The pounding got louder, then the shouting started. The lock in the door was flimsy at best. Bang, bang! I know you're in there. I freaked out frantically, texting my mom, asking to come home. She said it would be okay to brave it out. Then the man shouted, "If I see you again, I will slice you from ear to ear." I thought he was high on something, enraged with deep-set eyes, holding a kitchen devil moment away from bursting into the room. He was taken away. I never got the guy's name. I'm great now and have moved on. The worst part of it was when my little sister, still at school, this point had met me at the shops a few days later. I had to fake a smile and let her know I would be okay, even though inside I was crying. For the addict in the homeless shelter, let's never meet again. I want to watch you in your room from outside your window. A Let's Not Meet story written by hollyninja. A link to their original Reddit post will be available in the description down below. It was my junior year of high school. And I was new. Most people were very friendly, and honestly, regardless of this negative experience I had, I still think it was the best school I went to. I ended up hanging out with the skateboarders. Most of them were decent enough guys. We always had a great time listening to music and hitting up our local MDs after school. One of my best friends, Matt, had a twin brother named Will. Will, for some reason, didn't like me at all and was always rude to me. I tried asking Matt once why Will hated me so much, and he just said something like, "That's just how he is. Whatever, it wasn't my problem, and I never did anything to cause it, so I let it go." During the school year, I met a guy named Jesse. Jesse was odd, but he seemed harmless enough. Isn't that how all of these stories start? So I wasn't too worried in the beginning. We rarely talked and were mostly just acquaintances. Till one day, he came up to me in the hallway, handed me a note, and walked away. I was confused, but headed to my class before I got a chance to read the note. When I got settled in at my desk, I opened the note. It was mostly nonsensical. He said things like, "I want to watch you get into arguments with your mom. You're really pretty. I think we'd be good together. And the strangest one, I want to watch you play Uno by yourself." What the actual hell? It wasn't until the end that I felt the wave of chills through my body. I want to watch you in your room from outside your window. He ended the note with his signature and his phone number. No way. This had to be a joke. No one would write something so weird and be serious. I let it go, and my friends reassured me that he was just kind of weird. Will made fun of me for it. He found it hilarious. Jesse began showing up around my locker. It started out small with him just being there one period. Then it turned into every period. Every time I was there, he popped up somewhere in the hall. Our lockers were on separate sides of the school. We had no classes together, and there was really no reason why he'd be showing up all the time. But he always made his presence known somehow. Sometimes I would feel someone watching me and look around to see him somewhere in the hall. Sometimes just standing there staring at me. I absolutely hate being stared at. It makes me uncomfortable. There's no particular reason. It's just always bothered me. I just tried to ignore him and assumed it was part of the weird crush he had on me, until he followed me home one day. He didn't talk to me, just watched me walk to my house, which was just down the street from the school. I knew he never went that way, and was thoroughly creeped out. I never told anyone, but I knew he was aware of where my house was now. Was he going to show up? Would he watch me outside my window like he wanted to? I never saw him near my house again. But I was still freaked out. A couple weeks later, I found a picture in my locker. It was hand-drawn and signed with Jesse's signature. The picture was creepy as hell, with an angry-looking snowman full of stab wounds that bled into a puddle around the bottom of it. I was really freaked out, but again, I let it go. I wasn't sure what I could even do. Thinking back, I should have told a teacher or the principal, but I wasn't the type to make waves, and assumed he was just playing some kind of weird, sick joke. I showed my friends again, and they said it was creepy. They asked me if I wanted them to talk to Jesse for me, but I declined, again, not wanting problems. After all, I was new at the school. Will didn't make fun of me this time, though. He looked angry when he saw it, but never said anything to me about it. After a couple more weeks, during study hall, I asked my teacher if I could go in the hall to study, since it was too distracting with other kids talking. He let me, and I headed out. Will was sitting against the lockers, also wanting to get away from the noise. He looked up at me, then back down to his book. Typical Will. I sat a few lockers down and got comfortable and started reading my book. From down the hall, I heard footsteps coming our way. The footsteps stopped in front of me, and I looked up to see Jesse looking down at me with a smile on his face and a folded up piece of paper in his hand. He leaned down and gave it to me. When I opened it, I was immediately upset all over again. It was another drawing, this time of a Care Bear with a butcher knife in one hand, his heart in the other, and a huge, bloody hole in its chest. I looked up at Jesse, and he just smiled down at me in the most sinister way. I didn't know what to say, but I didn't have to. Will saw the picture and how upset I was. He stood up, walked over to Jesse, grabbed him by the shirt, and slammed him against the lockers. "Leave her alone and don't ever talk to her again, or I'll beat the hell out of you," Will told Jesse angrily. I was completely dumbfounded. Will hated me. He never said one nice thing to me. Jesse was equally surprised by the reaction, as he barely knew Will. He mumbled something and walked away. He never bothered me again, but still occasionally showed up around me at my locker. We never spoke after that. I didn't get any more notes or pictures, and he never followed me home again. I was thankful to the rudest person I knew for standing up to me and stepping in when I felt that I couldn't. I've grown into my own, having no problem standing up for myself, but I am still thankful to Will for what he did. I never told him, but I think he knew. You're a decent artist, but Jesse, let's not meet again. This is a warning. Do not ignore. A story written by Advanced Tangelo. A link to the original Reddit post will be available in the description down below. My first mistake was believing what the modern media would have us believe. Things on television happened in the West, in the States, and the United Kingdom, and sometimes in the sweeping forests of Germany. Somewhere along the way, we forgot that India, Hindustan, was the birthplace of myths, and stories, and legends, but also of nightmares and horrors and things that went a lot worse than bump at night. Legend says that the king of demons once conquered all of creation, heaven, hell, and earth itself, and so he began a reign of terror, inflicting his cruelty on gods and humans alike, until the creator Vishnu came to save us. Vishnu descended to earth in the guise of a beggar and begged the demon king for a boon, a gift of land, but only as much land as he could cover in 3 steps. The demon king was perceptive, and he was keenly aware of who the beggar was, but he had grown proud of his strength and confident in his might, so he agreed nonetheless. And so Vishnu planted 1 foot on all of heaven and another on all of earth, for he was magnificent, and his powers beyond comprehension. And then a 3rd sprouted from his chest and landed on hell. And so it was that the gods regained control of the universe. The demon king was broken, but Vishnu was a kind lord. He remembered the generosity of his enemy, and so granted him the domain of hell, and to reward the virtue found in an unlikely source, he decreed that the demon lord would be worshipped one night of the year until the end of time, and allowed to return to earth with this horde of demons, ghosts, and spirits, and the world went on. But the Demon King waited, smarting at having been tricked so. Every year he ascended, his army at the ready, his weapons rusty and dripping, but Vishnu had tempered his own kindness in turn. He had taught humanity to protect themselves by lighting up the world on this, the evilest of nights, on the 14th night of the lunar cycle. 14 candles to be placed around the house to prevent the ghosts from entering. 14 leaves to be eaten to gain the blessings of all their ancestors and to protect them from possession. And to worship the goddess Kali, who descended to earth every year in the form of the fierce Chamunda, and protected all of humanity with 14 loyal ghosts, spirits who still remembered who they once were. And so it went for thousands of years until warnings passed into myth, passed into memory. The land changed, the people changed, and the times changed most of all. Industry became the new god of the country, the internet her divine child, and so we forgot. My second mistake was, like many others, foregoing the 1,000-year rituals. I lit a single candle after my mother called and nagged, forewent the 14 leafy greens entirely, and did not spare a single prayer for Kali. But my third mistake was deliberate, and worst of them all. Diwali, for the generation above me, meant lights, crackers, and the warmth of family. For us, it was a festival of lights, crackers, and a legitimate excuse to party the night away. I don't remember much of the night before the events of the 14th night, but I remember landing up at my friend's party. I remember the first shot vividly, and the second, and the third, and the fourth. And then it began to get blurry. I remember music deep and echoing and throbbing through my bones, shuddering my bones with every beat. I remember the starburst of crackers all around me, punctuated by the sound of cherry bombs. I remember a girl with skin as dark as Kali herself, and darker hair that went down to her waist. I should have stayed with her. I stumbled out past 12 at night, mumbling my excuses and turning onto the pavement. The world swam unfairly before me, intent on making me reel my way through it, ignoring the shouts of the concerned or the annoyed who crossed my path. I don't know how I ended up there. I don't know where it was, even. But one moment I was staggering my way through lit-up streets, and the next I was standing in a pitch-dark alley, staring into the crack that lay at my feet. And it was quiet, quiet like a forest when the forest hunts, like the wind before the eagle swoops. The crack was shaped like an angry scar on the road, the sort that a knife would leave on an unsuspecting cheek. All around me was darkness, except for the orange glow that seemed to shine out from underneath it. In that moment, it was just me and the neon glow of the abrasion on the Earth's surface. My buzz vanished. Perhaps it was some ancient caveman part of my brain screaming at me to return to my senses and run. but I was hypnotized, enchanted by the ruby glow. I fell to my knees, hunching over it. Time seemed to have ceased, and space halted. And the only thing I could see was the red glow. And it was growing and growing until I saw, etched into the sides of the crack, a word. It was written in letters both like and unlike anything I'd ever seen, resembling my native tongue, but with characters I'd never seen. They stood dark and solid on the red glow, as if they had been sketched into the pitch with bloody nails. I had never seen anything like it before, but my tongue was moving of its own accord. It rolled and curved around that word, forming a sound that was like a dying man's last rattle, a last groaning heave of breath. What it was, I cannot say again, or maybe I will not again. And then the red was glowing, spreading, moving, blinding me until it turned painful, and then white, and then it turned dark, and I knew nothing more. I awoke to the sound of crying. For a second, the world was a blur, and the next, it slid into sharp focus as I jerked upright in bed. I was in my room, and there was a baby on the floor? It all came rushing back, the party, the alley, the crack on the ground. Something was very, very wrong. The baby lay on the floor, pink and squalling, looking for all the world like it had just entered the world. I watched it for long moments, the sound of its cry the only thing I could hear for miles. After a few seconds that seemed like lifetimes, I leaned forward. It kicked its arms and legs, as if sensing the intrusion on its personal space. And then it began to grow. Before my eyes, it stretched and reshaped itself into a toddler, and then a child who stopped crying but still jerked about. And then it was a teen, and then a full-grown adult. The man on my floor stood up and brushed himself off, the darkness winding around him like loving fingers to morph into clothes. I opened my mouth to scream, but the air seemed to have frozen in my lungs. Have you ever had goosebumps? I hadn't. Until then, not really. The way I had had them then, every hair on every inch of my body was standing up in sudden alert. Every inch of me screaming silently in horror at the sight of the man who looked exactly like me. It was like an artist had taken a picture of my face and then erased it and redrawn it a few times in curves. The curl to his mouth was crueler than mine had ever been, the shape of his body leaner and harsher. He spoke my name, and it was the sound of snakes slithering over a corpse's skin. And then I finally screamed, and screamed, and screamed until I was bent over from the force of it. Are you quite done? I shot back to the wall, away from the thing that was now sitting on the edge of my bed. I'd prefer it if you wouldn't scream again. The words that said it were guttural, crude, and obscene, but made perfect sense as they entered my ears. Who are you? I stuttered, trying slowly to reach for the phone in my pocket. He held the device up in his hand. It's pointless. You're already dead. What? He sighed, his lip curling up into an amused grin. You were dead the instant you gazed into the abyss, child. Your mind just doesn't know it yet. I gazed outside my window, at the darkness outside, at the light that came from nowhere to illuminate my room, and something cold and solid slid into place in my mind. I looked at my hands, paler than they had ever been, and felt the smooth, tight skin around my face. And in death, I found a courage that I hadn't in life, for I asked, "Then why are you here?" "To reward you, of course. Fool you might have been to call my name. But it is a great gift you have given me." My first question flashed through my mind again, and he seemed to be able to read either my face or my brain itself, for he smiled. For a split second the edges of him blurred, and suddenly I was looking at a horror beyond comprehension, a thing with mouths where they couldn't possibly be, with far too many teeth and curved nails that curved in on themselves to pierce blood-red skin, with eyes that blinked out of every surface, and the shadows receded to leave my doppelganger sitting before me, and I released a breath like I had been punched in the gut, for I had seen the darkness anoint his brow, sit atop his forehead like jagged stakes driven into a soft head. And it was the Demon King who was sitting on my bed. "What do you want of me?" "What do you want of me, my lord?" he corrected gently. "You are my subject now, and I would have you treat me as such. But I shall excuse such insolence tonight, for you have sprung my trap and opened the way to my reascension." "Reascension?" "A retaking, if you will," he explained, "the spoils of a war that I had won long ago and had been cheated out of. And then I shall rule over all creation." His mouth split along the corners to open in a smile that showed far too many rows of razor-sharp teeth. "And then gods and humans alike will know the true force of my anger." "But the 14th night is over," I protested, grasping on to the last straw like a drowning man. "You cannot ascend on any other night." "But the doorway is open now. On the night of the dead and the evil, I will rise once more, be it in a week or a month or a year." My dead heart raced as I took in the implications, as I imagined what it would mean for the world, for everybody I'd left behind. I had a nephew, a boy of just 5. "Mercy, my lord," I asked. "I beg for mercy as a boon. Spare us all from your wrath, and rule over hell as you have always done, and so too will humanity worship you forever." He tilted his head to the side, and perhaps it was my imagination, but his eyes glowed golden briefly, and then he said, "No," and my heart sank. "I've been punished for my naivete before. Ask what you want, child, but ask not things I can give." "Life, then?" I asked. "Could you bring me back to life?" He smiled, that terrible smile again, and I felt ugly things crawl under my skin, straining to break out. "I could send you back, of course, now more than ever, but life is not my domain, no. But that does not mean you could not return to your world. But send you back, I could." Something in the way he said it made me sit back with a heavy heart, swallowing the bitter truth that I was irrevocably, irretrievably dead. I felt the world blur again through tears, not alcohol this time, and the cold trickle of salt water down my cheek. "Come now," he said. "It won't be so bad. In a year, you won't remember who you were. Given time, you could rise in my ranks and be by my side as I retake what is rightfully mine. I imagined myself riding alongside him, driving my sword through my sister and my nephew and my mother. I felt sick. There had to be something I could do. But my lord, I begged, the world is much changed since you last rose. There are new kingdoms, richer kingdoms for you to conquer, with wealth double of ours, and with religions that are split in the face of your divine power. I had his interest, I could tell. The people have changed, my lord. No longer are they as simple and ascetic as they once were, especially not in the kingdoms I speak of. Here, you would find resistance at every door, candles on every window, and ancestors guarding every home. But there, they have embraced hell much more than they have heaven, teetering on the edge of a great descent themselves. You are telling the truth, he said, surprised. I will hear more of this. And so, I told him of a place where people lived, not in peace and goodness, but in war and gluttony, and lust and avarice, where family was dead and ancestors meant little, where excess and greed had taken the place of the frugal and moral. I told him of shining screens that were new gods and old gods that were slowly fading. My first mistake, of buying into the stories of the West, became my greatest strength. I thought of my sister, who had been deported, back just as she had been about to birth my nephew, and so I spun him a golden vision, and he took my bait. He promised my people immunity, granting mercy to those who still lit candles in their homes and remembered their ancestors well. But your boon, he asked, when I was done and kneeling before him, shaking from the horror I had just wrought. It is a great service you have done for me, and I would see you rightfully gifted. A place by my side, of course, but more, anything you ask? My lord, I said, daring not to meet his eyes. I would give them a chance if I could. The United States of America was born less than 3 centuries ago. The story of its rise is the story of the modern world, of the successes and the victories and decadence of humanity. It is the epicenter of the modern world, of the 21st century as we know it. I beg of you to listen, not just for those in the country, but all in the West, for he is a demon. He is only as good as his promise to save only those who take measures. He is strongest on the night of spirits, on the night of ancestors and the dead and the evil. On this day he shall rise again, and he shall be terrible and fierce, and he shall unleash horrors like you have never seen before. Remember this. Next Halloween, carve your pumpkins, but also light 14 candles all around your house. Keep your children in, and remember the 14 leaves and herbs and vegetables you must eat. Spinach, amaranth, water spinach, mustard, radish, basilica, fenugreek, young jute, turnips, chickpea, asafoetida, bottle gourd, pumpkin, and centella. Offer them to your young, to your old, and to your dead who have long left you. Pray, and when he comes, kneel.